After receiving requests to review Red Alert 2 basically since my channel began over 2 years ago, Soon has finally arrived. I do hope the wait was worth it. This video is the second in a 4-part series covering Red Alert. The first 3 will be focused on the respective numbered entries, and the fourth will be a longer retrospective covering the history and development of the entire series. It will feature multiple developer interviews and go into a lot of depth, starting from the series' inception up until today. If you haven't seen part 1 of this series, then I would encourage you to go and check it out via the link in the description below. There will also be links added for parts 3 and 4 as they're released, but if they're not there yet, make sure to subscribe to get notified as soon as they go live. Command & Conquer Red Alert 2 was released in October of the year 2000. 4 years after the original Red Alert and only 1 year after the iconic Command & Conquer Tiberian Sun. And despite there just being a mere 14-month gap between entries, Red Alert 2 brought with it a number of improvements from gameplay to graphics and presentation, making it one of, if not the most well-regarded and respected games in the entire Command & Conquer franchise. A claim that I'm sure will continue to be argued long into the future. Recently, we have just seen the release of Command & Conquer Remastered, which has brought the original Command & Conquer as well as Red Alert 1 up to modern standards with new graphics, music, and compatibility options. And from the second this project saw the light of day, people have been wondering if we'd see later Command & Conquer entries receive a similar treatment, namely this video's titular game. And as much as I would of course love to see that, there's no guarantee it'll ever come to fruition. So what we have now may just be what we're left with for the foreseeable future. So with that in mind, let's see if you should still play Red Alert 2, the original, as well as its expansion, Yuri's Revenge, in 2020. While Red Alert 2 does feel decidedly more modern than its 1996 predecessor, the details of which I'll get to throughout this video, it's still an old game, almost 20 years old at this point. And that's most apparent in its presentation. 4:3 aspect ratio, low resolution graphics and video, janky character animations, relatively weak special effects, all hallmarks of a game almost as old as I am that is clearly out of its league when competing with titles even 5 or 10 years its junior, let alone anything released nowadays. Any way you slice it, there's no getting around at Red Alert 2's obvious seniority. And I'm here to tell you that absolutely none of that matters. While aged, Red Alert 2 has a level of charm that I'm not sure I've seen anywhere else, in everything from its cutscenes to voice acting to music. All facets of the game's presentation just ooze with likability. And legitimately, within 5 minutes of booting the game for the first time, I'd pushed aside any preconceptions I had, and I was just having a blast. Remember, this video is the first I've ever played Red Alert 2, so I've got no bias coming into this one. And in a bit of a change of pace from our usual order, let's begin all this with the music. For as long as I've been on the internet, I've heard of how great the soundtrack is for Red Alert 2. I'd of course heard the extremely popular Hell March here and there, but never had I really sat down and been able to take in the game's entire score. And I've got to say, it's really exceeded my expectations. It is very good. However, I should have expected as much, as it's of course composed by veteran CNC composer Frank Klepacki. While I didn't know who he was at the time, I remember really enjoying the soundtrack for Tiberian Sun when I was a kid, and throughout the years I was exposed to his work in other games, most recently of course the original CNC and Red Alert, which I reviewed, but also unexpected ones like Star Wars Empire at War, a game which I personally hold in really high regard. As soon as you start the game, you're given a taste of what you're in for with the menu music, and I think this might be the best menu music I've ever heard. I mean, just listen to it. If this doesn't get you into the mood to throw down in battle, I really don't know what will. It's not just the main game either. Yuri's Revenge adds a bunch of new songs that capture the expansion very effectively, and they all have their own tone that sets them apart from the original. I like the music so much I decided to get in touch with Frank, the game's composer, and ask a few questions about how it came to be and why he thinks it stood the test of time so well. I mean, the love for that kind of stuff I think is really apparent with like Red Alert 2, right? I always hear people say that's like their favorite game and also soundtrack, like from all the games that have ever existed.
I hear it from all sides, people have got their individual favorites across the whole series. But yeah, Red Alert 2 did get a lot of well-received, compliments and fan mails and articles and all of that. So, I mean, again, it was another flattering thing to see happen. But, like I said, to this day, everybody's got their different favorites, and I hear about them, quite often. Hey, my favorite was Yuri's Revenge, or my favorite was, Aftermath, or my favorite was Red Alert 2, CNC, the original, nothing ever tops that. It's all over the place. Everybody's got their favorites.
I think it says a lot that every one of them can be someone's favorite, eh?
Yeah. To me, having seen it from the inside along the way, I've even gotten some favorites here and there of myself. Like I really enjoyed the games when the expansions came out even more, because I felt like they really did add something to them, especially like when we did Yuri's Revenge, actually, for Red Alert 2. That expansion really felt like a real, like, souped up addition that really enhanced the overall gameplay. And I could say the same thing about Tiberian Sun. When Firestorm came out, I thought that really added a really cool component with with the whole Cabal faction and all of that. So there was some really inventive stuff, and we had some really creative designers and producers, and people just pushing the envelope. And that was one thing about I give credit to Brett Sperry about, as the president, he was always very pushing people to do something different or fresh or new, or think outside the box a little bit more, and sometimes he would have a vague way of saying that, and you'd have to try to understand or interpret for yourself what that meant. But ultimately, he just wanted to push things, and after a while I finally got it, what that meant, and it was it's cool to have that kind of encouragement, because that means that your game's going to have more personality. It's going to stand out, and obviously stand the test of time. And it's living proof of those games.
The other half of the audio package, the sound effects, are also very good considering the game's age. While they're obviously lacking when compared to modern day titles in terms of advancements when compared to the previous game, it's very noticeable. The variety is hugely expanded, with a lot more individuality found in the unit quips, weapon fire, and just about everything else. Things are much more unique, and there's just less reused assets across different units, like there was in Tiberian Dawn and the first Red Alert. So the sound is pretty good, or excellent even, across the board, but how's the graphics? Well, you tell me, you've been staring at them for the past 10 or so minutes. Sorry, I jest. Anyway, it goes without saying that when we're considering what elements of a game age the most over time, it's normally the graphics that take the biggest hit. But though there's definitely some exceptions. And I'll admit, Red Alert 2 doesn't go against the status quo here. While the soundtrack has, if anything, gotten better with age, the visuals definitely do not stand up under the microscope quite as well. But that's not to say they look bad at all, actually. Considering its age, the art style actually holds it together quite well, and it's matured a whole heck of a lot better than its predecessor has. While special effects and such don't look great, the actual unit and building designs look pretty sweet, even now. They have that signature CNC charm to them, and the latter appear with those awesome animations that we've come to expect. I really love the Soviet Zeppelins, and some of it is just ridiculous, like the giant squid, which I guess makes sense in a way because it's mind controlled, but then the Allies just get dolphins. They're not mind controlled. Why do they work for the Allies? Who cares, right? It's just fun. Although it's easy to look at a 20-year-old game and say, lol, graphics bad, I think it's important to look at them in context as well. What's seen in Red Alert 2 is a massive step up from earlier entries, and it would be short-sighted to not acknowledge that. For the time, the game looked pretty darn good, but looking through the lens of 2020, I'm not going to lie to you and say that the game is a visual stunner or anything like that. It's aged a lot, but the art style still shines through, and to be perfectly honest, it's quite easy to overlook Red Alert 2's modern day visual shortcomings and appreciate it all the same. Lastly in the visuals, it wouldn't be a review of an old Command & Conquer game without talking about the campaign presentation and FMV cutscenes now award it. Like I'm sure most of you, I've been a huge fan of CNC's B-movie styling since the first time I ever saw it, and Red Alert 2 delivers what is, in my opinion, the best example of what I and many others love about it. The perfect amount of seriousness, camp, and understanding of what it is. It's hard to put into words, but this game just has it. A secret sauce, the X Factor, whatever you want to call it. Stars aligned, and every cutscene is just a joy to watch. It's entertaining, engaging, and somehow believable. Throughout the story there are some familiar faces that you'll recognise from other properties, and honestly I think the acting is really well done. They know what tone the game's going for, and the actors and actresses all lean into that tone really well.
Perhaps I can explain, Mr. President.
Yuri.
The device is called a psychic dominator. There is a network of such devices spread across the globe.
More of your mind control tricks?
No tricks, Mr. President. In a few moments I will unleash a tidal wave of psychic energy designed to dominate the minds of an entire planet. There will be no more free will, only my will.
Yuri. The war's over. Can't we all just get along? What if I was to give you a full presidential pardon? Your country needs a leader. It could be you.
Why should I be content to lead one nation if I can control the whole world, Mr. President?
You can't threaten us. We're the most powerful nation on Earth. We did win the war, you know.
Did you? Indeed? I think not.
There's some interesting camera angles done in these cutscenes too. Like, these are some pretty purposeful camera movements. Like Red Alert 2's predecessors, here there are two separate campaigns, this time one for the Allies and one for the Soviets, each with their own stories and characters. You're playing through the same storyline though, just on opposite sides, so it's fun to see each campaign cross over into each other, with characters and events making appearances on both ends. And while they're both entertaining, I think I personally preferred the Soviet campaign over the Allies. It feels like the developers were willing to take a few more liberties in the story and be a bit crazier throughout the whole thing. Scenes tend to have a lot more flair to them, and to be honest they often feel a bit unhinged, which makes for some really entertaining cinematics. If you play as the Soviets, you get teleported back to the dinosaur age in like the Jurassic period, and you've got to hold the line against T-Rexes as you fix the time machine. Look, don't think about it too hard, just strap in and enjoy the ride. It's cool to see the production value increased over earlier games too, with more diverse and intricate sets, and the refined use of green screens that really did stand out in some of the older games. I love how the expansion was handled as well. Playing them both now, they do meld together very smoothly, and it doesn't feel like you're playing a separate release, which is something I've experienced with some other games and their expansions. While there isn't a campaign for the new faction led by Yuri, you still get new ones for the Allies and Soviets, with Yuri acting as a common villain for them both. And I really enjoyed Yuri in that role, especially when compared to the main events of Red Alert 2. He works great with his quiet, reserved personality, holding immense power with his mind control shenanigans. And having to defeat him by reaching somewhat of a parley in certain situations between the Allies and the Soviets is a cause that you can easily get behind. And look, I'm not gonna lie here, overall the narratives in the base game and expansion aren't all that nuanced, and the characters aren't really developed. They don't really have any arcs or anything. But I do really respect that the game knows what it is, and it just completely owns it. Yes, the stories in both are completely wild and filled with more plot holes than a block of Swiss cheese, but overall it's easy to overlook them, because from beginning to end, it's just such a good time. Red Alert 2's gameplay is about as classic real-time strategy as you can get, but for me it's actually more than that. But to explain fully what I mean, I need to give you a bit of backstory. So, I've spoken in the past about how Tiberian Sun was my go-to Command & Conquer game as a kid. I played what I had, and because of that I didn't really get the chance to play Red Alert 2, or Generals for that matter. Instead, my next entries were Tiberian Wars and a bit of Red Alert 3, which obviously represent a huge change, both in terms of graphics and gameplay. And even going back and playing Generals a couple of years ago, it feels decidedly more like Tiberian Wars than Tiberian Sun, despite being released right smack in the middle of both of them. So where's the transition? When did this become this? Well, it turns out right here. Red Alert 2 is that missing link. There are a lot of new mechanics and systems here that I recognise from later games in the series, and it's really interesting, for me anyways, to see their origins in Red Alert 2. But it's more than just actual gameplay elements. Playing it just feels smoother, and it has a lot less jank than earlier games like Tiberian Sun or the first Red Alert game. Though admittedly, 90% of that probably comes down to the higher frame rate, and subsequently, a lot more fluid animations. I can't overlook the UI though, which actually plays a really big role here. It's here we see the first iteration of the modernised and updated sidebar that would continue to see refinements throughout Tiberian Wars and Red Alert 3. It's really surprising how much more playable the game is when we have these categories for units and structures, rather than just having an endless list for everything like we had in early entries. Though there are still no tooltips showing what buildings unlock or how to progress through the tech tree. And I know, I can hear you typing on your keyboards right now, but Zade, I hear you say, the game came with a manual and that had all the information. Yeah, I know, I've heard it before, but I'm going to point it out regardless, don't at me. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's take a few steps back to the game's core tenets. Like I said earlier, Red Alert 2 is basically as classic of an RTS experience as you can get. And when people think back to the glory days of real-time strategy, I'll bet this is often what they're thinking of. So the game has 3 unique factions that we did talk about earlier, those being the Allies, Soviets, and Yuri, who obviously was added in his titular expansion. And all of them come with an extensive range of units, buildings, and mechanics, making them all really unique and all really fun to play. So while you've of course seen this all before, base building, resource harvesting, rolling your enemies with huge armies, etc., in context, Red Alert 2 is a huge advancement over its predecessors. I alluded to this earlier, but the amount of recognisable mechanics here from newer games in the series actually surprised me as someone who had never played it before. Things like unit veterancy, which previously I thought originated in Command & Conquer Generals, even though I have absolutely no idea what bonuses a unit gets here when it's promoted. This might be anecdotal evidence, but I swear my soldiers and vehicles would become units of magnitude stronger as they gained experience. And there's some other pretty unique mechanics here too, that clearly illustrate the advancements made to the game since their last release. If you're playing the campaign, then they're made available as you get through the mission roster, and often your objectives will be built around one of these mechanics to make for pretty unique missions. There's one I found particularly interesting in the Allied campaign of Red Alert 2, when you're given a team of spies and tasked with infiltrating and destroying key buildings in a Soviet facility. You've got to watch out for the dogs who can smell you and break your cover, and keep Tanya hidden as she sets the charges. Don't worry though, she can take out any infantry that come your way, but it's the defense towers that you have to worry about. It's a fun mission, and a welcome change from the expected build base and destroy enemy objectives. As a side note, Tanya is an absolute monster by the way. She can wipe out infantry units like they're nothing. I just found it funny watching her completely annihilating hordes of soldiers. Is she as strong as the Chrono Legionnaires though? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we just have to put them in a 1v1 deathmatch and see who wins. Overpowered, maybe? Anyway, as expected, you unlock these mechanics along with powerful structures and abilities as you get later into the campaign. But in skirmish and multiplayer, it's all on. And I was really glad to see the ability to choose different factions within the Allied and Soviet sides return from Red Alert 1, as it gives a bit more variety when playing outside the campaign. If you're unfamiliar, each faction grants its own unique unit, which can help you push your gameplay style in a particular direction. Speaking of multiplayer, you can actually still play it without much difficulty at all. Though as the game and expansion are not freeware like its predecessor, you will still need to own the game legitimately. But if you don't own it, you can still get it right now off EA's Origin service as part of the Command & Conquer Ultimate Collection. Do that, download the CNCnet client, and boom, you're in. It doesn't just add the functionality for multiplayer either, there's also a lot of quality of life features for hosting and joining games, and giving more options for those games as well. There's even an optional community patch for the Yuri's faction that aims to make it a bit less overpowering and more micro-intensive. Talking about the gameplay in general, it's really nice to have something be so lean yet so enjoyable. There's no nonsense to slow you down or get in your way, just hit play and go. Battles are fast, action's heavy, and its use of the now classic rock paper scissors mechanics mean you're always thinking ahead to what's next. Like a lot of classic RTS games, Red Alert 2 has no shortage of mods to expand the experience from what's on the disc. And in this case, the most well respected is almost certainly Mental Omega. Well, of course there are a ton of interesting and varied mods out there for both the base game and Yuri's Revenge. Unfortunately, I can't cover them all. But if you do want to change things up, then go and check out what's available on ModDB. There's sure to be something there that interests you. Back to Mental Omega though, I wanted to talk a bit about it as it's A, so popular, and B, so good. Seriously, the amount of stuff this mod adds, as well as the quality that comes with it, is frankly astounding. It's essentially a full expansion to Red Alert 2, and here's just some of what it includes. A new faction, a campaign for Yuri, hundreds of maps, new single-player missions, sub-factions with unique units, an entirely new soundtrack, integration with CNCnet for online play, the list just goes on. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff I missed too, but you get the idea. And it's not a quantity over quality thing either, everything's really well implemented and it works into what's already available really well. This reminds me of something like Rise of the Reds for Command & Conquer Generals. Mental Omega is damn impressive. And it's easy to set up too. You do need to own the game of course, like if you're playing with CNCnet, but providing you do, it's a breeze to download, install and just get playing. It has its own integrations with CNCnet, so you can play online with other people using the mod in basically just a few clicks. So while I can't say I've played everything it has to offer, because there is a lot, what I have seen has left a really positive impression. If you've seen everything Red Alert 2 has to give, and you want to get a bucket load of new content to try out, then this is the place to look. While I've praised the presentation and gameplay of Red Alert 2 and how it stood the test of time exceptionally well, unfortunately not everything is at that level. But I'll be honest here, I am baiting you a bit with that statement. The game's actually pretty good in this respect, all things considered. Starting with purchasing options, you can actually buy it legally and digitally without much hassle, always nice to see with 20-year-old games. It's available through EA's Origin service, which has problems of its own, believe me I know, as part of the Command & Conquer Ultimate Collection, for what I believe is $15. It's available for 25 New Zealand dollars over here. And say what you will about EA, but this is some really good value. While it's not as good a value as free, like the original Red Alert is now, it really is tough to complain about. Technically, it runs pretty well too, though I don't think there's been much work done in making it run especially well on modern PCs, as there are some issues I've run into. It just tends to do okay. Yes, it does run and play as normal in full screen, but trying to Alt-Tab always caused the game to crash for me, and it really did mess up my open windows sprawled across my triple monitor setup. Another thing that I do understand won't affect most people though, is I did have some real trouble recording this game, for whatever reason. It just wouldn't record at all with AMD's built-in software, and to get OBS to record my screen I either had to run it in a teeny tiny window to get a guaranteed result, or just boot it normally and cross my fingers that I would see it. In my testing, it seemed to work around 1 in every 5 times. Like I said, not a big deal, but it is worth mentioning. And of course, as with any technical issues, you at home may not see any of these problems, or you may get twice as many. As always, your mileage may vary. But there is an asterisk to most of that, a good one actually, and it's CNCnet, coming to save the day as it has before. If you're interested in playing skirmish or multiplayer matches online, then you can run the game through the CNCnet client and it may just alleviate most of the technical issues you could run into. In my experience, it worked really well, and just as it was for Red Alert 1 and Tiberian Dawn, it was really easy to set up and configure. Seriously, those guys have done an excellent job making all this stuff so easy, so I do recommend you give it a go if you haven't already, though I'm sure most of you probably have. And if you do really like it, maybe consider tossing them a few bucks to support the project, as it's completely community driven. Hashtag not sponsored, I'm just saying. Yes, like many games we cover on this channel, Red Alert 2 is old. But unlike a lot of them, in my opinion, it's also extremely playable, and one of the best examples of an RTS from the golden era of strategy that still holds up incredibly well today. It has the special combination you don't often see with older games. The gameplay is engaging enough to still be enjoyable after nearly 20 years, the visuals hold up mainly because of the excellent art style, and the soundtrack's just great, even if you don't have an enormous level of nostalgia for it. And the whole package remains surprisingly accessible, regardless of whether you want to play the campaign or online multiplayer. Normally in the conclusion of these videos, there's some caveat that I feel required to point out. A detracting point that will undoubtedly turn a bunch of people off playing the game today for themselves. But to be honest, I can't think of one big enough that's worth mentioning for Red Alert 2. And it's for that reason that I'm going to keep this conclusion short. If you've been thinking of revisiting it or have never played it to begin with, then I recommend you do. You can even buy it on Origin digitally and get more than a few great games in the same package. There's going to be a link in the description if you want to check that out. Seriously, just go play it. Thanks, job done. See you next time. And also, if you'd like to watch the full interview with Frank Klepacki, then please check the description below. It's split into 2 parts and I had a really great time talking with him. I hope you guys do enjoy it. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more, subscribe while you're at it. I really do appreciate it. If you'd like to keep up to date with the channel, as well as with upcoming videos, then you can also go follow me on Twitter. There's a link in the description. Otherwise, thanks again, and I will see you all next time.